A family of experienced climbers, consisting of a father, sister and brother, are scaling a steep cliff. Suddenly, a bag flies past them. It turns out that a group of novices above them lost their balance and began to fall. They collided with the Garrett family, leaving 5 people dangling from a single rope. Due to the clumsy movements of the inexperienced climbers, only one anchor point remained secure, and ultimately, they all plunged into the abyss together. Annie desperately tries to reach the rock to secure an additional anchor, but the hook holding them begins to give way. The father orders Peter to cut the rope, or the entire family could perish. Annie begs her brother not to do it, but Peter makes the tough decision, and their father falls to his death. 3 years have passed since that tragic day. Peter has turned his back on climbing and now only ascends mountains to photograph wildlife. He currently works in the region of the Lesser Himalayas. One day, his assistant falls from a hill and breaks his leg, forcing Peter to return to the base camp at the foot of K2. Meanwhile, billionaire Elliot Vaughn brings a group of 40 people to the area, aiming to conquer the summit. The camp is located near a Pakistani army post that constantly exchanges fire with Indian forces. Vaughn's team is accompanied by Peter's sister, Annie, who, unlike her brother, has become a famous mountaineer and took on this challenging task. A renowned entrepreneur arrives at the camp, followed by a team of journalists documenting his climb. The event also attracts the attention of many experienced climbers. Skip Taylor tells Peter that this is actually a massive publicity campaign tied to the launch of Vaughn's new airline. Vaughn paid McLaren a full $1 million to help him reach the summit. Monique, a manager and doctor who immediately catches Peter's eye, becomes part of this expedition. In the evening, a lively party was held. 4 years ago, the entrepreneur attempted to conquer K2, but the effort ended in tragedy. The celebration is overshadowed by the appearance of Montgomery Wick, the world's best climber, who believes the weather will be unsuitable and that Tom McLaren has taken on too much responsibility. Wick has spent the last 4 years wandering the mountain slopes, searching for the body of his deceased wife. Annie, however, believes that her brother made the wrong decision 3 years ago and that they could have saved their father. Now she climbs K2 in his memory. At dawn, the climbers left the camp by helicopter. Kareem bid farewell to his brother, who was one of the guides. Peter noticed that the wind was beginning to pick up. However, the billionaire chose to rely on the computer forecasts, which indicated an 82% chance of good weather. Despite this, McLaren also noticed signs of an approaching storm and suggested turning back, but the billionaire insisted on continuing, arguing that they could reach a safe spot and wait out the storm there. Annie supported Vaughn and convinced the climbers to proceed with the dangerous ascent. Peter, upon seeing the satellite images, raised the alarm, noting the storm's approach, and suggested they urgently descend. McLaren agreed, but Vaughn played on his pride, suggesting he would regret missing the chance to make a name for himself. The team continued their ascent, but the wind intensified, and McLaren finally decided to turn back, but it was too late. The storm overtook them. The climbers faced strong winds and nearly zero visibility. Suddenly, Annie fell into a snow cave, but she managed to survive thanks to the safety rope that connected her to the others. The rest weren't so lucky. A massive avalanche descended from the mountain and swept the team away. Only Elliot Vaughn and Tom McLaren survived in the cave, but McLaren had fallen badly, injuring his spine. Vaughn tried to contact the base, but the signal barely penetrated the thick snow. Suddenly, Peter suggested using Morse code to send signals, remembering how their father had taught them this in childhood. Annie responded, confirming they were alive, but it would be extremely difficult to reach them. At such an altitude, the rescue operation could be deadly. Skip informed Peter that the survivors had no more than 36 hours before they would suffer from pulmonary edema. Peter asked the Pakistanis to provide explosives, and they agreed to share some nitroglycerin. However, the substance was stored in unreliable containers, and the highly explosive liquid spilled onto Skip's boot, turning him into a walking bomb. Late in the evening, Peter attempted to gather a group of experienced climbers who were willing to undertake a risky, rapid ascent of K2 with the nitroglycerin. However, most recognized the danger of the mission and declined. The only volunteers were Skip and Kareem, who hoped his cousin might still be alive, and two Rastafarian brothers who unexpectedly decided to risk their lives. Meanwhile, the survivors discussed how to ration their remaining water, as its availability would protect them from pulmonary edema. As long as they had supplies, they could melt ice using a burner and then use the dexamethasone syringes. Peter and Skip calculated that they would be about 5 hours short of reaching the survivors and concluded that they needed the help of Montgomery Wick, who knew the fastest route to the summit. Monique also joined the team, after Vaughn's associate offered $500 to each member of the rescue mission, and she was in a difficult financial situation. The first thing the group did was find Montgomery, who was initially reluctant to join the rescue. However, his attitude changed when he learned that the billionaire Vaughn was among the trapped. For some reason, Wick insisted that Skip stay at the camp, expressing distrust towards him. The remaining team members were paired up, with Monique partnered with the rude Cyril. Each pair was to proceed to the avalanche site using different routes. The helicopter lifted them as high as possible, hovering over the abyss. Monique was the first to jump onto the rock ledge without any safety harness and then helped the others descend. However, the equipment began to malfunction, and Peter and Wick risked falling, while Monique narrowly avoided being struck by the helicopter blade. Wick saved Peter, pulling him onto the ledge. Meanwhile, the billionaire glared angrily at McLaren, whose condition was worsening. Annie wanted to administer dexamethasone to him, but Vaughn was against it, believing that McLaren wouldn't survive anyway and didn't want to waste resources on someone he deemed doomed. Cynically approaching McLaren, Vaughn told him that he wouldn't be able to be brought down alive and that he should accept his fate and not endanger the rest of the group. Montgomery, who had been a friend of Peter's father, assured him that cutting the rope had been the right decision. Any experienced climber would have done the same in such a situation. Meanwhile, Annie was finding it increasingly difficult to breathe, and it was time to administer dexamethasone, but Vaughn seemed intent on keeping all the syringes for himself, even though he showed no symptoms yet. As Cyril waited for Monique to climb up, he accidentally placed his backpack on the snow, and it began to slide down the slope. Cyril rushed after it, but lost his balance and sped down the slope as well. At the last moment, he managed to stop himself using his ice axe, leaving him dangling over the abyss. Monique cautiously approached to save her partner, securing a rope to the ice axe, but suddenly, a chunk of ice broke off and fell into the chasm. She then tried to swing Cyril towards the nearest ledge so he could grab hold. He managed to cling to the rock, but a canister of nitroglycerin fell out of his backpack and plummeted down. The climbers attempted to shield themselves from the blast wave. Cyril managed to climb up and threw a rope down to Monique. However, he relaxed too soon, as an avalanche triggered by the explosion swept him away. Monique desperately leapt for the rope to save herself. At the same time, Annie was trying to reach a backpack she had spotted on the opposite side of the cave. Inside, there might be supplies that could buy them a little more time. Risking her life, she retrieved the backpack, but began coughing, and the ice bridge beneath her feet started to collapse. At that moment, another explosion occurred, nearly killing Annie. Inside the backpack, she found some water and 4 syringes of dexamethasone. Finally, she was able to administer the life-saving medication to herself and McLaren. Monique survived but dislocated her finger, and to reset it, Peter distracted her by engaging in personal conversation. Malcolm, trying not to think about his deceased brother, eventually fell to his knees and burst into tears. Kareem suggested that his partner return to the camp and proceeded alone, but Malcolm refused to give up and, gathering his strength, continued onward. Meanwhile, the Pakistanis left canisters of nitroglycerin exposed to direct sunlight, causing the camp to explode. Apparently, no one knew about the explosive sensitivity to sunlight. The climbers were instructed to quickly hide the remaining canisters in the shade, but there was no contact with Malcolm and Kareem, so Peter hurried to warn them of the danger. The climbers quickly covered the canisters with snow and lay down to rest, but the liquid leaked again and spilled into the sunlight. As a result, an explosion occurred, blowing the climbers to pieces, and Peter's team was buried under an avalanche of snow. After the explosion, the frozen body of a woman appeared in the snow. It was Montgomery's wife, whom he had been searching for unsuccessfully for years. He removed her wedding ring from her neck and found an empty syringe container nearby. It turned out that the woman had died while accompanying Elliot Vaughn's group, and she likely didn't receive dexamethasone then because the billionaire had taken all the medication for himself. In reality, the old man had agreed to join Peter's team to kill that scoundrel. In the evening, Annie contacted Peter and asked him to return, warning that she could only hold out for another 2 hours and that the rescuers wouldn't reach them in time. However, Peter was determined and wasn't going to lose another family member in the mountains. Vaughn, feeling his condition worsen, immediately injected himself with dexamethasone, then drew air into a syringe and killed McLaren. At dawn, Montgomery discovered that Peter was gone and realized that he had set off alone. Vaughn, panicking, began trying to find a way out. Annie, seeing the dead climber and the empty syringe, quickly understood what had happened. She attacked Vaughn, but he easily pushed her away. At that moment, part of the snow collapsed, and light shone through a hole. Peter reached the edge of a cliff, and although descending seemed like the only option, he gained momentum and leapt, hooking onto a neighboring cliff with 2 ice axes. Meanwhile, Vaughn came up with a way to signal their location. He cut open McLaren's body and filled a bag with his blood. Together with Annie, they raised the bag to the surface, and when it emerged from the snow, they exploded it with a flare, staining everything around with blood. With the last of their strength, Peter and Monique reached the summit and found the bloody marker. They dropped a whistle down and warned that they were preparing for an explosion. Peter drained the nitroglycerin and detonated it, clearing a path to the trapped survivors. Vaughn was the first to tie Annie to a rope to be pulled up, but the snow began to collapse, and she ended up back down. The anchor point failed, but she was held in place by Montgomery, who had descended into the cave to Vaughn. The billionaire realized that Vic had come for him and tried to defend himself with an ice axe, but the old man easily disarmed him. However, Vic didn't kill Vaughn. He came to help lift Annie, but at some point, her legs hit a block of snow, causing her to fall and trigger the collapse of the ledge the climbers were standing on. All of them ended up hanging on a single rope. Vic didn't ask Peter for help. He had his own knife. Despite Vaughn's pleas, Vic cut the rope without hesitation and plunged into the abyss with his enemy. Out of all the expedition members, only Monique, Peter, and Annie survive. At the end, she says that their father would have been angry with them, but at the same time incredibly proud. The movie ends there.